At the beginning, the marriage appeared normal from the outside. Shared routines, familiar conversations, and the unspoken assumption that love was the foundation holding everything together. Yet beneath that surface, something had quietly shifted. When the husband accidentally overheard his wife talking about alimony, it wasn't just a casual legal discussion or a passing thought sparked by curiosity. It was calculated, deliberate, and disturbingly detached. In that moment, he realized that money had begun to replace emotional connection in her mind. The conversation revealed not concern about the marriage, but anticipation of profit, as if the end of their relationship was already being weighed in financial terms. Love, once emotional and personal, had been reduced to numbers and outcomes. This realization hit harder than any argument could have. There was no shouting, no accusation, no dramatic confrontation, just a silent understanding that something sacred had been corrupted. The idea that a spouse could secretly plan a future that benefited her only after the marriage's collapse showed a deep erosion of trust. The husband began replaying past moments in his head, subtle changes in her behavior, growing emotional distance, sudden interest in legal or financial topics. All of it now seemed connected, forming a pattern he had been too trusting to see earlier. What hurt most wasn't the possibility of divorce, but the discovery that his role in her life might have shifted from partner to financial asset. Greed often disguises itself as practicality. In her mind, she may have justified these thoughts as being smart or planning ahead, but the absence of empathy revealed the truth. There was no concern about how divorce would affect him emotionally, mentally, or socially, only about what she could gain from it. That quiet greed, spoken so casually, exposed a harsh reality. When financial security becomes the primary motivation, love turns conditional. The marriage stops being a bond and becomes a transaction waiting to be finalized. For the husband, this moment marked a turning point. He didn't feel anger immediately. Instead, he felt clarity. The illusion shattered, replacing confusion with understanding. He recognized that confronting her directly would only push her to act faster and more aggressively. Silence, observation, and patience became his tools. Rather than reacting emotionally, he chose to think strategically. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting himself from being used by someone who no longer saw him as an equal partner. This key moment underscores a powerful truth about relationships. When money enters the conversation as an exit strategy rather than a shared responsibility, the relationship is already broken. The wife's hidden greed didn't just threaten the marriage, it redefined it. What she thought was a private conversation became the evidence that changed everything. From that point on, the husband understood that the love he believed in was no longer mutual, and that understanding set the stage for every decision that followed. After overhearing the conversation about alimony, the husband understood that acting on impulse would only weaken his position. Emotional reactions, anger, confrontation, or accusations might have given temporary relief, but they would have also alerted his wife to the fact that her intentions were no longer hidden. Instead, he chose restraint. This decision marked a shift from emotional vulnerability to calculated awareness. He realized that if his marriage had quietly turned into a financial strategy for her, then he had every right to protect himself using intelligence rather than confrontation. What followed was not revenge fueled by bitterness, but a form of self-defense born out of clarity. Pretending that he had been fired was not an easy lie to carry. It required discipline, consistency, and emotional control. He had to play the role of a man under pressure, hiding both his stability and his awareness. Each day he observed how her behavior changed in response to this new reality. The warmth she once showed faded quickly, replaced by irritation, impatience, and emotional distance. Where there should have been support and concern, there was disappointment and subtle resentment. This reaction confirmed what he had suspected all along, that her commitment was closely tied to his financial value rather than the relationship itself. This calculated deception became a mirror, reflecting her true priorities back at her. When the idea of alimony once sparked interest and confidence, the idea of financial struggle triggered withdrawal. He noticed how conversations shifted away from the future and toward dissatisfaction. The emotional investment she once claimed to have seemed conditional, dependent on comfort rather than connection. By saying he got fired, he removed the incentive that had quietly been motivating her. What remained was the unfiltered truth of how she viewed the marriage. Some might see his decision as manipulative, but from his perspective, it was a necessary boundary. He was no longer dealing with honesty on equal terms. Revealing the truth too early would have allowed her to prepare legally and emotionally in ways that could damage him. By controlling the narrative, he reclaimed a sense of power that had been slipping away without his knowledge. This wasn't about humiliating her. It was about leveling a field that had already become unfair. The most difficult part was maintaining emotional neutrality. He had to suppress the pain of watching his marriage unravel while pretending ignorance. Yet this emotional discipline allowed him to see clearly. The lie exposed what direct questions never could. It showed that loyalty, in her eyes, was negotiable, and stability was more valuable than partnership. In that sense, the deception served as a truth-revealing test. Through this strategy, the husband transformed from a passive participant into an active protector of his own future. His silence was not weakness, it was preparation. The decision to lie about losing his job was not rooted in cruelty, but in self-preservation. It was the moment he stopped being reactive and started thinking ahead, understanding that sometimes the only way to defend yourself against manipulation is to step out of emotional honesty and into strategic clarity. Once the illusion of financial stability was removed, events moved quickly, almost too quickly. The wife, who had once spoken casually about alimony as if it were a guaranteed outcome, began to see divorce not as a distant option, but as an urgent decision. In her mind, staying any longer meant risking a future tied to uncertainty rather than gain. The idea that the marriage might require patience, sacrifice, or mutual rebuilding no longer appealed to her. Instead of reassessing her expectations, she rushed toward an exit, believing that ending things sooner would still somehow work in her favor. Her decision to file for divorce was driven by assumption rather than understanding. She assumed that the system would reward her simply for leaving, that there would be something to claim regardless of circumstances. What she failed to consider was timing, context, and reality. With her husband now unemployed, there was no financial advantage waiting on the other side, no steady income to calculate, no assets growing quietly in the background, no safety net she could land on. The very rush that made her feel decisive ended up stripping her of leverage. As legal proceedings began, the fantasy she had built slowly collapsed. Conversations with lawyers were no longer filled with confidence but confusion. Without income to divide or alimony to demand, her expectations met cold facts. The law did not operate on entitlement or emotional narratives. It responded to evidence, numbers, and circumstance. What she thought would be a rewarding separation turned into a disappointing realization that there was nothing to gain. Her eagerness had closed doors she didn't even know existed. For the husband, this phase was emotionally complex. On the surface, everything unfolded exactly as logic predicted, yet there was no joy in watching someone self-destruct through greed and impatience. He remained quiet, composed, and observant. Each step confirmed that her choice was never about unhappiness or incompatibility. It was about timing a financial win. When that win disappeared, so did her interest in working through the marriage. The divorce wasn't a tragedy caused by two people drifting apart. It was a transaction that failed due to miscalculation. The true backfire came not just in the legal outcome, but in the loss of moral ground. She couldn't claim betrayal or abuse, couldn't paint herself as a victim of circumstances. Her decision appeared sudden and unsupported, raising unspoken questions even among those who initially sympathized with her. Meanwhile, the husband's calm demeanor and lack of resistance quietly reshaped the narrative. He didn't fight her decision, didn't beg her to stay, and didn't panic. That absence of chaos made her choice look even more hollow. In the end, filing for divorce too early sealed the outcome. Had patience been present, had sincerity guided her actions, things might have unfolded differently. Instead, her confidence turned into regret. She walked away expecting security and walked out with nothing. No financial reward, no emotional closure, and no control over the outcome. The divorce that was meant to empower her became the clearest proof that greed, when rushed and unchecked, often defeats itself. As the divorce process moved forward, the absence of money changed everything. Without the promise of alimony or financial gain, the narrative the wife had built in her mind began to unravel. What she once justified as dissatisfaction in the marriage started to look like something else entirely. The emotional complaints she raised now sounded rehearsed and hollow, lacking the urgency they might have carried if they were genuine. With no financial incentive left to pursue, the reasons for leaving the marriage appeared thin, exposing the gap between what she said and what had truly motivated her. It was in this phase that the truth surfaced, not through confession, but through behavior. Her confidence faded, replaced by frustration and visible regret. She questioned her decisions more often, not because she missed the relationship, but because the outcome wasn't what she had envisioned. The absence of material reward forced her to confront an uncomfortable reality. Once money was removed from the equation, there was little left to justify her actions. The mask she had worn of a spouse seeking fairness or independence slipped, revealing someone driven more by expectation than emotion. The husband observed this shift quietly. He didn't confront her with accusations or reveal that he had planned ahead. There was no need. Her reactions spoke louder than words ever could. When she realized that divorce would not deliver the lifestyle she imagined, her attitude softened, but not in a way that suggested remorse. It was the softness of disappointment, not regret. That distinction mattered. True regret carries accountability. Disappointment only acknowledges a failed outcome. This difference confirmed what he had already understood, that love had not been the driving force behind her choices. As legal discussions continued, the imbalance became even clearer. Without financial leverage, her position weakened. She could no longer frame the divorce as an act of empowerment or justice. The story she had perhaps planned to tell friends, family, or even herself no longer fit the facts. The truth emerged quietly. The marriage had ended because it wasn't unbearable, but because it no longer seemed profitable. Once that profit vanished, so did the conviction behind her decision. For the husband, this was not a moment of triumph, but of closure. Seeing the truth so plainly removed any lingering doubt or emotional confusion. He no longer questioned whether he had misunderstood her intentions or overreacted. The unfolding reality validated his instincts. He recognized that a relationship dependent on financial advantage was never stable to begin with. What fell apart wasn't a loving marriage, it was a strategy that failed. By the time the process neared its end, the roles had subtly reversed. She appeared uncertain, unsettled, and stripped of the control she once believed she had. He, on the other hand, was calm and resolved, no longer tied to illusions. The truth, once hidden behind private conversations and unspoken plans, stood exposed. When money was removed, authenticity followed, and in that exposure, the husband finally saw the marriage for what it truly was, an arrangement that survived only as long as it served one side. When everything was finally over, there was no dramatic celebration, no public declaration of victory, and no desire to rub the outcome in anyone's face. The husband walked away quietly, carrying something far more valuable than money or pride: clarity. The divorce had stripped away illusions, revealing not only who his wife truly was, but also who he had become through the process. He had entered the marriage believing in partnership and trust, and he left it understanding the importance of self-respect and awareness. That understanding gave him a sense of peace that no courtroom win could ever provide. The real victory lay in restraint. He never exposed her intentions publicly, never humiliated her, and never sought validation from others. He allowed events to unfold naturally, trusting that truth did not need to be announced to be powerful. This quiet approach protected his dignity and prevented the bitterness that often follows betrayal. Instead of being consumed by anger, he focused on moving forward with a clear mind and a lighter emotional burden. The absence of revenge became a form of strength, signaling that he was no longer emotionally entangled in the conflict. Emotionally, closure came not from apologies or explanations, but from acceptance. He accepted that the marriage had ended long before the divorce papers were signed. The legal separation merely formalized what had already happened internally. By recognizing this, he freed himself from the need to replay conversations or question his own judgment. There was no longer a need to ask "what if," because the outcome had revealed the truth beyond doubt. Acceptance replaced confusion, and with it came emotional stability. This experience reshaped his perspective on relationships and trust. He did not become cynical or closed off. Instead, he became more discerning. He learned to value consistency over promises, actions over words. The pain he endured turned into a lesson rather than a wound. He understood that real partnership survives hardship, uncertainty, and change. Anything that collapses the moment comfort disappears was never built on solid ground. This realization prepared him for healthier connections in the future. Financially and legally, he remained intact, but that was only part of the relief. The greater freedom was internal. He no longer felt responsible for someone who viewed him as a resource rather than a person. Letting go of that burden gave him space to rebuild his life on his own terms. The silence that followed the divorce was not loneliness, it was calm. A calm that allowed reflection, growth, and renewed purpose. In the end, his quiet victory was not about outsmarting someone else, but about reclaiming himself. He walked away without bitterness, without regret, and without needing approval. What remained was self-respect, emotional closure, and the confidence that he had protected his future without losing his humanity. That, more than anything else, was the true reward.